Please be warned, this episode contains graphic descriptions of violence and atrocities against people, which may be alarming to some listeners.
From the ramp, we were sent to the wooden barrack. I cannot imagine where it stood. It was a short walk away. There were already women and girls inside. There were many of them there. There were no beds in the barracks. Down in the middle was a stone bench. I saw that women were kneeling at the stone bench and holding rocks in their upraised hands. When one of the kneeling women could not take any more and lowered her hands, she was painfully beaten and then thrown out of the barracks. To where? I don't know.
Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Auschwitz Liberation Podcast episode 5, where we're covering the 20th and 21st of January. The testimony you just heard was by Lala Cikogna. She was a Polish Jew from Łódź, from the Lichtenstein ghetto. She was deported to Auschwitz, and that was her testimony. Let's start today. We're going to start with me today, actually. I usually would have made Chris talk about the advancing Soviet front. I thought you might want to hear from me, even though I even do the intros. I thought let's kick it off with removing more evidence. Kate has spoken about this quite a lot over the first few episodes really, but this is a continuation of this. Now, it's on the 20th of January. The order is given to the SS, the permanent sentry post, to leave Auschwitz. We're not quite sure if it was exactly on the 20th, but it would have been between the 20th or the 21st. The camp is now only guarded by SS patrols. And the really interesting thing here is that retreating Wehrmacht soldiers would enter the camp and plunder it. So they'd go into Canada or some of the other places where they had personal effects of prisoners that, have been confiscated, taken away, and they'd plunder it. They'd plunder it for food and all sorts of other things. I mean, who wouldn't want to find a golden ring and send it home to their family? The other thing that's happening is they're still evacuating loads and loads of documents that they need to keep, that they want to keep. Some of the most important files, like I said, office machinery as well, that were loaded onto the trucks on the night of 18th and 19th and arrived at Gross Rosen. So a lot of things are being sent to the Gross Rosen camp, which eventually would then have to be taken from Gross Rosen and taken further deeper into the Third Reich. There were 2 SS men that were employed and 6 Jewish women. They went with the permission of the Auschwitz commandant and ended up in Gross Rosen. There were also numerous German officials that still remained in Auschwitz, even though most of the SS had been evacuated, as well as factory representatives. And then the other very interesting thing is, Kate already mentioned this. Again, I'm going to bring Kate up quite a lot in this, but the SS had already prepped the crematoria. They had burred holes into it. They had removed all the equipment. And it's today that they actually blow up crematoria 2 and 3. So the first crematoria as you enter Auschwitz on the left and the right hand side. So those are the ones that have been blown up. What you see now is exactly how they had left it. Kate mentioned before that Canada had been set alight, but it was still at this point that the SS were attempting to remove the property that was being collected there, but they didn't have as many transport facilities as they had assumed, because there was a shortage of guards, there was a shortage of transports, trains, trucks, and all sorts of things. So they more or less abandoned these plans. And then eventually, as you very well know, they end up setting it alight. And this is also where those Wehrmacht soldiers are coming in and plundering whatever they can. You got to remember, it's also really cold in Poland at this time, even though nowadays we get max -5, -6. We're talking about -15, -16 temperatures at this stage in 1945 in January in Poland. But talking about cold and equipment and things like that, Chris, what are the Soviets doing with their not so great equipment advancing into Poland?
Well, they're doing really well at this point. Krakow fell on the 19th, and now they're looking at moving towards the Silesian heartlands with the 3rd Guard tanks, who had smashed quite far into the German lines. They've now been turned around and sent back because they they were getting far too close to Breslau, and they know that the Germans are actually going to be fortifying Silesia because they want to hold on to the industry for as long as possible. Łódź has also fallen, and the Germans have basically said that they can't hold the Soviet advance, so they're going to use the River Oder as a natural barrier because armies take a lot longer to cross rivers than they do fields, and it's much easier to defend. As you sort of hinted at, the Wehrmacht soldiers are in a pretty dire situation anyway, but now they're running out of food and supplies, and so any cases of supplies that they can get hold of, they are going to be helping themselves. The 60th Army, which is the one that we're following, is also continuing to push towards the area, and it's tasked with encircling the region around South Oswiecim, Chasnov, and Rybnik, and Rakbios, which are all on the same line. And so they're on a direct line to the Auschwitz camp. But what does this mean for Auschwitz itself? Well, at 2 p.m, on the 21st, they start finding Soviet artillery shells falling nearby. On the left bank of the Vistula, the Soviets have broken the front and are now approaching the region from the north. And the evacuation has already started, as you said, of SS officials and general administration. It's now only a matter of time before the Soviets arrive. And on top of that, you've also got the Western Allies getting involved. On the 20th of January, there's another air raid on the industrial targets in the camp. During the bombardment of the Oberschlesische Heidrewerke, the SS have abandoned the guard towers in the subcamp and at Blechhammer, and Blechhammer prisoners then take full advantage of this, and some of them attempt to cut the wires and punch a hole in the wall and try to flee. Among them are, most of the prisoners are obviously Jewish, Boris Sojiet and Aaron Pieniat, as well as several Polish prisoners. 40 of them managed to escape to the forest. 12 of them are shot as they try to flee, and then they managed to hide in the forest for several days, sort of eating moss and bark and drinking rainwater, and hide there until the Russians turn up a few days later. There's a second air raid this was the second air raid in 2 days, targeting the IG Farben works. Despite the American bombing, efficiency at the installation is not really damaged too much, and it's partially restored within a couple of days. And funnily, there was a testimony I read the other day from a British POW who was at the British camp at Auschwitz, and they were making comments about how the Americans couldn't hit, or the Allied bombers couldn't hit anything. So the Germans are trying to keep it going for as long as possible. But talking of prisoner escapes, Kate, do we have any more?
So, yes, Chris, we do have more prisoners escaping, and the information that I'm going to use for this bit actually comes from a testimony of Alina, who on the 18th of January recalled being pushed into roll call after roll call after roll call, saying that the guards were basically wasting the prisoners' time. She says she was depressed, tired, and abused. Eventually, they were forced out onto a march away from the camp. She says this was around noon on Friday, January the 19th. She said, fueled by hope and promises from the SS men that they would load us onto wagons, they continued to march while being screamed at by the Germans. Unfortunately, it was a lie, she said, to encourage us just to march faster. As they passed through a town, some of the Silesian women showed them compassion and kindness by offering them water, cigarettes, matches, etc., when the guards weren't looking. Bless them in spirit, she said. It didn't take long, maybe 20 minutes, before the commands of Raus, los, schnell were screamed at them again. She talks about a forest, black and dangerous and rustling to the right-hand side of where they are marching, and in the ditches there were victims lying who'd been shot, and a repeated false promise that the railway was not far away. We dragged ourselves with the last of our strength, she says, a few kilometres away. On the left of the road, I saw a wide open gate to a spacious yard with farm buildings. In the middle of the square was a pile of used straw. We were so tired, it seemed to us the perfect place to rest. But this was premature joy. The yard was already occupied by prisoners just like them, and there was no room left for them. So they had to go outside, look for another place to stay. And she said it was difficult to describe the feeling that took hold of us. We finally got somewhere to stay in the barn of a blacksmith, took off their shoes and managed to sleep. Great joy took hold of us, she said, at the thought that we'd be able to take the frozen shoes off our swollen, maimed feet, lay down our aching bodies and taste the bliss of sleep. So several of them stayed in that barn and managed to get some rest, although the temperatures were well below zero and the wind blew through the cracks of the barn through the leaky boards. She says in the meantime, it turned out the blacksmith's daughter actually recognized one of the prisoners as somebody she'd known and took them into her apartment where she fed them, made sure they had rest, and gave them the opportunity to kind of recoup, pull themselves together. 11 female prisoners were hosted in this way, and the blacksmith's daughter realised they didn't have the strength to go any further. She said there was no time to think. We had to decide to escape. And in total, 11 women managed to get away. She was amongst the last to leave. It was getting dark. The guard was sleeping behind the door. With difficulty, we made it through the yard, covered in deep snow, constantly sinking, only to get stuck again with the next step. After crossing the yard, a field covered in snow appeared, and through it we had to go cross country to get away from the road we had previously taken and to reach the forest. So she manages to escape from this march under these false promises of being given transport. She said the feeling of gaining freedom did not resonate strongly in our consciousness because of our weakened and exhausted state, and we reacted very poorly to such a fortunate coincidence that had brought us full freedom. I guess they just couldn't believe it. She talks again about the snow, about the exhaustion and the scant possessions. Her friend had taken some food which consisted of an onion, a slice of bread, a handful of sugar and a bit of fat. She had a small towel wrapped round her neck and a comb in her hand. She makes it deep into the forest, whose silence, trees standing motionless and dark bushes silhouetted at our feet, had a calming effect on us. So being able to get away from the horror that was Auschwitz and being able to escape, and I guess those first signs of freedom must have been truly, truly frightening, exciting, liberating, exhausting, everything you can think of. So picking up from the end of that testimony, at 6 o'clock in the morning, the Birkenau prisoners left Poremba and Brechech. The SS men searched the piles of straw and hay in the sheds and barns, and they shot several prisoners who they found who had tried to hide. But despite all of this, 36 prisoners managed to escape, and that testimony was from just one of them. The SS also detained columns of female prisoners for the night in this village, who were placed on the farms of local farmers. And although these farms were guarded by SS men, there were many female prisoners who managed to escape with the help of the inhabitants. In one of these homes, there was a woman and her 7-year-old daughter who'd been brought from Birkenau in a wheelchair, which is something quite phenomenal, was rescued. And another prisoner, Leocadia Rowinska, gave birth to a baby. A local woman helped her to get him baptized, but unfortunately, after 9 days, he died. They had no other options. They buried him in a cardboard box and put him under the shrine of St. Joseph. In the morning of the 20th of January, a group of SS men entered the women's camp, and in there they ordered the women prisoners who were still there to cook them lunch. They gave them poultry, a suckling pig, and they told them to prepare the food, but they didn't get a chance to eat their lunch because they were ordered to march out quickly. After they left, some of the healthier male and female prisoners also decided to escape. They broke down the locked gate in the camp and they entered the camp manager's barrack, the Blockführerstube, where they started to demolish everything they found. Suddenly, they noticed an SS unit approaching from a distance, and I guess in fear of their lives, they made their way back into the camp. This detachment entered the women's camp. The commander ordered all Jewish women prisoners to come out of the barracks. About 200 women came out. They were led outside the camp gate and they were shot. The SS unit then proceeded to the men's hospital camp, and from there a group of prisoners were taken and told to bring boxes of dynamite and lay them under the buildings of crematoria 2 and 3. On the 21st of January, inmates from the Auschwitz main camp arrived at Birkenau with the news that there were SS warehouses at their premises with so much food it could feed them for months on end. So groups of male and female prisoners immediately set off with hand carts to the warehouses, and they found 2 slaughtered pigs, tins of meat, condensed milk, pasta, and other food products. Can you imagine seeing all that food after effectively starving for so long? So our problem with the SS leaving and the final evacuations, the prisoners were left with nothing. No food, no electricity, no water, no way to heat evacuate their barracks. It was cold, as Alina has said. This is January in Poland, and these people were just doing their absolute best to try and survive.
Well, moving on from what Kate has just said, well, sticking more or less with the same subject, this problem with the SS leaving also creates absolute chaos. And when I mean absolute chaos, it's this event really sums up the chaoticness of the camp. So this happens on the 21st of January. And the Soviet POWs that have remained, or Soviet prisoners of war, they bring out 2 rifles that they'd been hiding, and they fire several shots into the air. And you got to remember, there's only SS units patrolling the area, but there are Wehrmacht. They're the ones that alert them, who come to the camp and they search for the firearms within all of the barracks. They couldn't find any weapons, but there, as we mentioned previously with the Sonderkommando uprising, there was an informant. And again, in this situation, there is another one. And it's a German capo, Otto Schulz. He's the one tells Germans a Soviet prisoner of war named Andrei had fired a rifle. Now, he was never found, but they did go look for him. And Anna Homich sums up this disorder and the way that they ended up searching for the prisoners of war. So I'll let you tell her part of the testimony.
I remember that a handful of Soviet prisoners of war, Russians, including Andrei, found rifles in the guardhouse, leading to the men's camp BTF, and in enthusiastic mood because of the coming liberation, they started to shoot them. The shots were heard by the nearby SS troops, who soon started seeking from the Russians. The Russians tried to hide away. For example, Andrei reached the block where I was staying. That is block 18, where with the help of a Russian inmate, Natasha, he put on a headscarf and found shelter on a 3rd level of the bunk bed. Later, he left the block and I don't know where he went. The SS crew finally found the Russians and executed them. Ordered by the SS, inmate took the bodies of the shot Russians to crematorium 5, where they were burned on a wood pyre. Still before the liberation, I saw the partially burned bodies of the Russians of the said pyre. The crematorium was still standing, yet it was no longer in operation.
Moving on from Anna Homich's testimony, I was going to talk about Blechhammer's subcamp. I mean, Chris has already mentioned the chaos of it. If you do head to our Patreon, I will talk a little bit more about the subcamp. But there is one other that is left, and that is Chekhovic's vacuum. And that has a very interesting story with a very interesting testimony. And I'll let Chris tell you all about it.
Yeah, so I should sort of give a bit of background as to what this camp was. So the Chekhovic's vacuum camp is established in September 1944 to house around 600 prisoners to work at the nearby oil refinery, mostly maintaining the grounds and clearing up rubble from the air raids. The guards are made up of 10 SS, 30 Wehrmacht from the Sentry Company, but by day the prisoners are guarded by the Org Tot. So on the 18th of January, orders have given to evacuate the camp, and they have 561 prisoners there at the time, and about 400 of them are marched away to the nearby railway stations for dispersal to other camps. Most of them end up at Buchenwald, but very few of them then survive to the end of the war. Of the 150 that are still left in the camp, who are too sick or in some cases feigning illness to avoid going on the death march, they're all rounded up on the 21st of January by armed Org Tot men, and then they're forced to dig a 2-metre deep pit. A few hours later, SS and SD men turn up and shoot most of them into the pit, cover them with straw, and then set fire to it. And any prisoners who were obviously too sick to even make it to the pit to do the digging, the pits were just machine gunned in their cots, and there was only a handful of survivors. And we have a testimony from one of them, Erwin Habel.
Sometime before the 20th of January 1945, units of the Tot organization's armed members entered the subcamp ground. Finding myself in the yard, I dumped my mattress right by the door and told the armed men that I was going back for a second mattress. It happened so fast that the old man had no time to react before I returned to the building. At that moment, I heard a shot. It motivated me to act fast. I ran into the deeps of the residential building and crawled under the bed to remain unseen. I took a board from my bed and hid behind it. When I was hidden, I heard the voices of my fellow prisoners informing the Germans that the one is hiding. In the confusion, the Germans disregarded this information. When the shooting stopped, I wanted to get outside. From in front of the building, I saw the armed Germans were coming back, so I quickly concealed myself in the straw, lying between the dead prisoners. A moment later, an occasion presented itself to escape.
In a sea of harrowing testimonies, that one stands out.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. That's the end of episode 5 of the Auschwitz Liberation podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Remember, if you want to support us further, then please consider joining our Patreon, where you'll find extra content the day after each episode is aired. Just head to patreon.com/moments_in_time. Or if you don't want to sign up but do want to give us a one-off payment, then you can do so at ko-fi.com/momentsin time. Also, don't forget to rate us on your favorite listening platform. If that's Spotify or if it's Apple or wherever you do your listening, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and see you all on the 24th for episode 6.